righty. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for spending the next hour with us for our WIMNA Wednesday Mentor Series. Tonight's guest is Katie Brannan, who is the Manager of Public Relations at Ryan Herta Autosport. So for those of you who've never joined us for one of these evenings, what's great about it is it's not the typical, hey, who are you, where are you from? We'll do a little bit of that, but we're going to go right into sort of the details about what it is to be a PR person in motorsport. Also, obviously we'll talk a little bit about Katie's background and how she got here. We're also going to talk about what she really does through the course of a race season, right? So the difference between what happens on a race weekend to during the week. And while we're having the conversation, by all means, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll be monitoring that. We do have a good amount of questions though, too. So if you want us to, follow up on something, we'll keep an eye on the chat, but we'll also open it up for some Q&A at the end though, too. So you will get an opportunity. We are recording it, but I always say this at the beginning of these, that although we're recording it, depending on how the conversation goes, and if we get in a sort of any sensitive topic or sensitive territory, if we want to continue having that conversation, we should. And at the end of the talk, so if I say that to say, if you guys want to share any personal experiences, please feel free to do so, because then at the end of this and at the end of the recording, if we then decide that something's too sensitive and we want to just scrap it, we'll delete the recording. And so that I want you to more feel like we're in a safe space, but we just proactively record it so that in case the conversations are great, we want to share it, we'll just put it in the library so that people can watch it later. Okay, so with that, welcome, Katie.
Thank you. Super honored to be here.
Excellent. And do you want to switch the view at all, Kim, so that we're like a little bit bigger? I don't know how. I'm not driving the Zoom. But whatever.
I think it's just it goes from whoever is speaking to the other. It kind of flip flops on the windows.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So, and I guess it also depends on how you set your own, how you set your own layout. Okay, so welcome, Katie, as I said, and really, I mean, the easiest way to start. I know some of us we had our WIMNA event in Indianapolis, so some of the ladies in the audience got to meet you then, but we also have some new faces here. So tell us about yourself and a little bit about your background and how you got to your current role at Ryan Herta Autosport.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. So I actually grew up in northern Idaho on the Canadian border and didn't even know racing existed. And then we moved to Arizona when I was in high school, and I was always fascinated with other languages and cultures, and there was a Formula One race coming. And my mom took me because there was going to be people from all around the world. We didn't know anything about an actual race or what it was. So I'm pretty lucky to say my first race ever was a Formula One race, and it was in Phoenix. And we were there 1 hour, and I said, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And I was 15 and a half. And so from that moment forward, I studied everything I could about every aspect of racing. I was getting up at 4 a.m. and watching Formula One races and going to every INDYCAR race I could and going to the dirt track races and just learning really as much about the sport to prepare myself for when I graduated and would hopefully have my first opportunity. And
did you have an idea of a job at that point, or just like, I want to be in this and whatever that is?
Yeah, I think it was the smells and the sounds and the international flair. I've always been very interested in languages. I studied languages in college, and I just fell in love with racing. It just happened. And so when I was in college, I got an internship at Firebird Raceway in Phoenix, and there used to be a lot of off-season testing there for INDYCAR, and it was also the home to the Winter Nationals for NHRA. And so it was a great place to do an internship and really learn the event and track side, but also because of all the testing, I was able to really watch the team side closely. And it prepared me for my first real job, which was with PPI Motorsports in Southern California. They were an INDYCAR team. We had MCI and Maito Cristiano D'Amata and Oriol Servia, Scott Pruitt. Pioneer was one of our partners. We were a factory Toyota team. So I learned so much there. With all those affiliations, and then they went NASCAR racing, and I went with them for a year, and then knew my heart was an open wheel and came back.
And so that first job, though, was that when you said you were working, because in the winter there was so much off-season stuff. So I assume that was that a time when you were able to kind of just meet a lot of people and kind of build your own network at that point, because obviously in the winter, as you know, like there's less a little less stress. So you can actually kind of get to talk to people sometimes a little bit more. Do you think that helped you at that point?
Yeah. So, it might have, yeah, I mean, I did meet some people in that team. I was always trying to go to racetracks and network from the time I was about 17. In fact, my brother has a picture of me talking to Roger Penske when I was 17. He told me he'd pay me $20 if I went up and asked him how to become a PR person in racing. And I was terrified, but I did it. But yeah, definitely working at that track helped me get my first start and meet people. But the thing that I would really say, one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give to someone wanting to get going in this is try as many different, like try to work for a track, try to work so that you understand the event side of it. The event side of it is huge, and it'll give you a better respect and understanding of what's going on if you decide you want to work for a team or for a series. It's fascinating and very hard work working for a
Absolutely.
racetrack and the event side. Yeah. So I always think that was probably the best thing I could have done to get my start, because it gave me an understanding of when you work for a race team, it can get a little bit secular because it's your same group and the same tracks. And it's really important to get out of the pits and broaden your horizons and wings and try to learn as much about an event in a series and racetracks as you can.
I think that's the thing. There's so many stakeholders on any given weekend, and they all have different, challenges, different ambitions. And the more you understand that, which is why we always encourage even people listening to these every month, is even if it's not exactly in the discipline that you might think that you're going to work in, like tonight we're talking about public relations and sort of things adjacent to public relations, that's great. But I mean, my goodness, I think it'd be great for an engineer to be listening to these conversations, to maybe understand broadly like what's going on around them, because obviously it's part of a larger ecosystem, and the more that we understand how it works, ideally the more successful we'll be, and maybe also the more respect you kind of gain in the paddock. But to that point, I have a question about that. So because we're talking about public relations, could you also maybe explain what the differences are between public relations, client services, and marketing in as it pertains to like race teams or series, but like or venues, but like within racing? Difference between PR, client services, and marketing.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked, because they are very different. So for example, a PR person works directly with the media. They work directly with the drivers. They handle scheduling, appearances, pitching stories. I like to say a big part of my job is getting the ROI for our partners, the return on investment for our partners, and that's through media and exposure. Then there's a client services element. Well, let me go to marketing first. So there's often a commercial director or a marketing director. Sometimes on teams they're called commercial directors. Sometimes in tracks or in partnership companies they're called marketing directors. But they are generally more responsible for selling partnerships, for managing the partnership and the activation, and how they make sure that partner gets their ROI. And then there's often a sponsor relations or client services person, and they help activate the partnership. So they might help with ticketing or guests on the race weekend or dinners and events. And so if you're on a smaller team, maybe you do some of both of that. Like I'm in my team now, we're in TCR. And so I do a lot of sponsor relations and also PR. But sometimes when you work in a larger series or for a larger team, they'll have specific people in each of those roles. So for example, in INDYCAR and in NASCAR, it's more common for those teams to have people in each of those roles.
Right. And you can certainly work in one and then decide you might like another and evolve.
For sure. And they work hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have to say, I have always said one of the hardest jobs in racing is selling sponsorship, being the marketing person. That's a really hard job. And that's different from PR.
Absolutely different. Yeah, for sure. And people don't necessarily know. And then, I mean, and I know I don't want to skip ahead, but it might be interesting to just mention it now. Social media has changed a lot too. And so somebody that's a social media manager is not public relations, but I think people sort of maybe blend the two a little bit more. But so how has social media, and I mean, goodness, not to date yourself, but you're in the same boat where like we remember what it was like before social media. And so in the beginning, it was a bit the Wild West, figuring out what to do with it. obviously it's much more mature now. And so it kind of has its own lane. There's again crossover, but how would you explain the role
Still
of
makes
social
PR
media?
people nervous.
Especially when your driver is like tweeting or posting on Instagram late at night.
Yeah. Yeah. So social media has been really, to me, very, very interesting. I mean, I'm still a little bit of a traditionalist and I love to pick up a newspaper and a magazine. And I get really excited when we're on morning news, and I really appreciate the quantifiable value of all of that. I love to pitch the story and get it as super rewarding. But social media is instant, and it's there's a lot of eyeballs that see it very quickly. But it's different. It comes in, things come and go so quickly there. So I really appreciate the value of traditional PR and giving your story maybe a little bit longer shelf life. But the power of social media it's changing all the time.
Yeah.
When I say it makes a PR person nervous, because traditionally, we're very disciplined in making sure our sponsors and partners are represented correctly. We always want to, they're trusting us with their brand, and it's really important to get the most out of every opportunity, but also be as professional as we can for them. And so things happen on social media that are, a little bit, sometimes they can be a little bit of a loose cannon, but that also is great for creating new fans. People appreciate the fact that they can interact almost directly with the driver through social media. So I think it's, there are a lot more pluses than there are negatives. I'm still curious to see, right now for example, we just won this championship with Robert Wickens 2 weeks ago at Road Atlanta. And I don't know if you all are familiar with his story. I hope you are, because
congratulations. Yeah, it was a huge win. Yeah.
It was amazing. And his whole journey has been so amazing. So anyway, I'm working on reports right now. We're pitching this story, and fortunately that story has some longevity through the winter, but I'm constantly updating my ROI, my reports that show the exposure and the values of the exposure. And now I use a company called Coverage Book for these, so that we can give them to our partners and say, look, this story garnered this much value. And for example, when Robbie made his debut back racing, and this is in TCR, which is kind of like the AAA of IMSA, we had more exposure value than the actual Rolex 24-hour race winner had.
Wow. Right.
So, which is awesome. So then we can take that and we can give that to our marketing people, and we can take that to our partners and say, look, it's working. This is the exposure and the value you're getting for your investment.
And it's a reliable third party, metric. And I think that's the thing that people don't realize. That yes, social media is ubiquitous and it's constant, and we all can have it, in our hands, right? So, and we all know, we're very aware that it's happening, but the reality is it's still hard to measure the social media impression to an action that, like, are we measuring that because somebody saw a post on Instagram of just the race car, did they then go buy X?
Are they buying on Monday?
On this, exactly. Was it because it was on the side of the car? So and obviously social media has been around for so many years that, they're still trying to really get, obviously direct ads where something's, on Instagram that you're selling directly, that's very obvious and measurable. The other broader impressions. So that's why if people are questioning why does PR still exist if social media is so instant, it's because it's still not as reliable. Like the measurement is not the same as traditional PR. But to that point, when you're saying about how you're pitching stories, how have you or how does a PR person really cultivate those media relationships?
Okay, I'll tell you, but I first got to say one more thing on social media.
Yeah.
So the other thing is there's a lot of consequences, and we've seen that, with some NASCAR drivers and celebrities all around the world. They've been around things that were filmed, or they've said things that they didn't realize, or whatever. And so for traditional PR, there's damage control. And so it's important to really be aware. With the Hyundai drivers, I put on a Hyundai drivers camp every winter, and it's 3 days of fitness, and we do media training, and we do corporate training and engineering training, all these things. But we talk about those things because some of those consequences are really damaging, and those are the types of things that will cost you a drive, because if you damage your relationship with your manufacturer, it's hard for them to justify your paycheck. Sorry, there's a blinder.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so that's something else. And the other thing is with social media is, right now in the off season, I'm spending some time figuring out what's the most effective way to go. The splash is exciting and they're fun, but how do you stay unique from what everybody else is doing? And what's really driving the fan base and what's really driving up your numbers or the interest? And I work really closely with my drivers. I had a long conversation with one of them today about that, talking about their plan for next year. So it's almost like it could be its own big conversation, but it's important. The other thing is, a lot, from my experience, a lot of the people that are doing social media are younger, which is awesome because they have, a fresher point of view per se. I mean, I'm from the days when I can remember trying to find the AOL number in Japan when we were racing there in carts so I could send my press release or a fax.
Right.
It's so much change. But so a lot of these young people that are doing social media are really creative and great, but they're also, I'd be interested to know in school how much they're teaching about branding and I see drivers all the time now with their fire suits down, their pictures are on social and there's no branding on them.
Exactly.
And that's just traditionally been such a no-no, right? So.
And what you're saying about the, the thing that's amazing is you can be building up this great reputation, but because of something instantly it can erode very quickly in social, where obviously public relations is very controlled, very strategic, planned. It's saving you from yourself if you're a driver, right? But to that point, having, employed run factory programs and employed drivers, still in a position where I employ drivers. I will tell you, any driver that ever aspires to work for a professional team or get a factory drive, they absolutely look at all of that social history. And if there's, and it's one of those things, you could have two drivers that are have the same result on the timing sheet. And if one driver is less problematic on social, a large company, I mean, it's not just about your followers. It's the tenor of that content, the quality of that content. And it's risky. And I understand why you say it still kind of makes, it makes everybody a little nervous. And it's very easy that we've oh, but look, I've got TikTok, I've got this. Sure. But I mean, and we can all look in the past couple of years, we can all think of different drivers that have had a bit of a hiccup. And those are, it leads to meetings at 1 o'clock in the morning of what are we going to do tomorrow? And how are we going to get in front of this? And
yep, exactly.
So as an employee, can I ask you, but as a PR rep, have you always been a direct employee or are you mostly a consultant or have you done both?
I've done both. So when I first started, my very first INDYCAR team I worked for, I was an employee. It was a great experience because I worked from the race shop. And I think there's a lot of value to that, especially early in your career. It's really important to develop relationships with your team and trust. So as you're getting started, I would say, locate yourself so that you can work close to your team and develop relationships and learn from all the experiences that happen every day in a race shop. Right. The latter half of my career, I've been a consultant. So I actually live in Nevada and my team is in Indianapolis. I was telling you earlier, I'm with this team because I did Brian's PR back for a period of time back when he was racing. So we already, had experience with one another and the trust built. So he's allowed me to be a consultant, work from Nevada. But what I would say to all of you is early in your career, just immerse yourself as much as you can because relationships are huge. You have to build so much trust within your team, whether it's with the engineers, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, like driver schedules and how a weekend works. But it's really a synergy, even away from the racetrack, and it's your family too. So, I am a consultant.
There are some other people, and like you say, you got to that point though later in your career, like when you're first starting out, the recommendation is to work for a team. And because we do know that there are people in PR, for instance, in motorsports PR, who will just start their own agency, or they're a few years in, they're going to start their own agency. And so they'll have multiple clients. And I get that because sometimes that's the way that they have to kind of cobble together an income and they build a business for themselves. And that's fantastic. But then on a given race weekend, they may have 5 clients. And so they are definitely, and some race teams need less than others. And so it lends itself to that where what they're doing is a bit formulaic. But I think what you just described, like if you're really looking at this as a long-term career, maybe you want to get to that in time, but if you really want to understand how it works or really, like you say, build those real relationships, because you're also going to still be building the relationships with the media and everything else. But I think starting out, you would recommend that people would start with a team if they can.
Yeah. Well, start as an employee. Yeah.
As an employee, yeah.
Whether and start,
well, they can be employee of a series or a track. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But a
yeah.
direct
Be
employee,
on
yeah.
site for sure, because you just learn so much. And I also would say too, you know, it's not, if you have an opportunity that is beyond your experience level, it's not always the best opportunity to take. I really think for longevity, it's worth it to start at the bottom. For me, it was worth it to start as an intern, as an event. I remember my very first race weekend at Firebird, it was Winter Nationals for NHRA. And they suggested I bring my sleeping bag and sleep there. And I did, because we literally worked till 2 a.m, went on ticketing and all these different things. And then we were back at work at 5 a.m. And I did everything at that event, from even some track announcing in the booth to gathering donations from different teams to running tickets to all the radio stations. But it was such great experience. And so if you're in school now and you can get an internship, you should do it. And if you're just out of school, take opportunities, any opportunity you can get, even if it's something as a coordinator job, because you learn.
Even if it's part-time to start.
Even if it's part-time.
Yeah, if part-time is available, take that to start.
Yeah, for sure. And even if it's just a race weekend, maybe you live in Indy, see if you can go to the Speedway and work an event weekend. Anything you can do, any experience you can get will really help.
I think that's great advice. So speaking about like what you do now, and again, whether it's, you talk about how you do it now or how you did it, 20 years ago for a full-time team, what would you say is the bulk of what you do during the week when you're not at the racetrack? Like what are you doing during your days?
Okay. So right now it's off season. We just finished 2 weeks ago. So I'm doing, but it's also auto show. We're coming up on LA Auto Show. So my team is the factory team for Hyundai Motor America. So we work very closely with them. It's been an amazing experience, because when they came on with Reinhardt Autosport, most of them were fairly new to racing. And so we've really been lucky to help them shape their program. And it's been super successful. We just won our 5th straight championship, and we helped start this Hyundai and Owners Club from like 7 people in Florida, and now it's nationwide. And they're going crazy and coming to the races and supporting us online and in person. And so that's been awesome. So right now I'm still pitching Robbie and Harry's championship very hard. And I feel like that story's got some great longevity over the next couple of months. But when I'm not working on that, today I worked on LA Auto Show things. We have 2 drivers there over 2 weekends. One driver's going to be there a little extra time. So I trying to pitch some media for him in his downtime or appearances, trying to develop some potential possibilities there. I spent an hour with the driver today talking about social media. We were at Grid Life last weekend. So we are downloading on Grid Life, which is really a cool car culture experience that is great for Hyundai. And I'm learning about, because it's new. What else have I done today? But
let's say it's a week that's leading up to a race weekend. So let's say it's the middle of June and it's a week. So what are you doing before you get to the track?
So prior to every race, so I'll create what I call a fast facts, and it's basically like a media tip sheet. We have 6 drivers on our team, so you always want to shine some light on all of them. Sometimes it's hard because like one car this year was a 2-time champion, and this year they were the defending champions 2 years in a row, and they had a really rough season this year. So you're really trying to evenly shed some light and pitch stories for all of them. So I create a fact sheet that's it's like a media tip sheet. And I use that to pitch. So I'll look at the market, where we're going, and we get a media sheet from the series. And so I will directly call. That's another thing with PR. You got to be ready to get uncomfortable. So it's getting easier as I get older, but I call radio stations, TV, and print, and a lot of websites, and try to garner coverage for my team. So I spend a lot of time doing that during race week. We now have somebody that's helping us with social, but I kind of still give her the agenda of what we need to cover and talk about. Photography, what our photography plan is, what our video plan is. We produce a show along with a company called Co-First for Hyundai. It's called Next Level. So kind of help them plan for what's going to happen with Next Level. And then I make the driver's schedules.
Do you have your own photographers, like your own team photographer that's there too? So you're kind of doing a shot list and everything as well?
Yeah. So we use LAT, Mike Levitt.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So I've worked with him for years, but he and I usually chat going into a race weekend. You know, do I have any special guests? Do we have any special events going on? What do we need to shoot? Do we have, I'm a big fan of, for me, I think my greatest joy is creating new race fans. So I love it when we have guests that aren't familiar with racing. And I absolutely is my goal 100% to make sure they are fanatics by the time they leave. And they usually are. And that's so rewarding to me. Some of you gals were at Indianapolis and came and did a garage tour with us. And I love those experiences and opportunities. So a lot of times I'll reach out to the track or the series and say, hey, do you guys, do you need anything this weekend? There's definitely you scratch my back, I scratch yours in this sport,
Right.
because you are always going to need help in the series or a favor or a parking pass or a ticket. So
right.
when a more quiet weekend, I try to do a little extra in those rounds.
True. But that's to your point though, is that it's like, it's just as you're cultivating like the media people, you're cultivating these other, partners and stakeholders, because it is like the reality is the reason you can still get an extra parking pass is because you've known that track operator for the past 15 years.
Yeah.
It's because you did a favor last year, right? Yes.
For sure. It's super important.
Which goes back to building your network, right? Build your network.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're going to work with these people at some point in your life. I mean, I have teammates on my team right now that I've worked with probably 4 other times in my life. One downside of racing is it's an expensive sport and teams don't always last a long time. I've been on a lot of teams. I've never been fired, but I've been on a lot of teams because the sponsorship goes away and the team closes. But if you work hard and you build trust, you'll always find another job. And that's a really scary thing. You feel the first couple times that happened to me, it's like, oh God, is the cruise ship leaving without me? Am I going to have a job? I always have. It's scary, but it's part of it. And that's why you treat every day. If you love what you do, it's easy to do a good job, but you're always have that in the back of your mind.
Yeah. And
but a big part of my,
but PR, the nice thing is you've also honed a skill set that, respectfully, you could also get a job in PR if you wanted to somewhere else, if you had to. But obviously that's always like a last resort for those of us that just have the racing bug. But the nice thing is what you're doing is it's an entire skill set that absolutely is, marketable and you can still keep a roof over your head, which is wonderful.
And actually it's really interesting because I had a friend here that ran a resort. And so I got out of racing for a few years when I had my son, and I worked as a consultant locally. And so they were kind of wanting to up their activity level here and presence in this area. And so I did some PR for this resort, and we put on some big events, and it was really fun. And I think that the biggest, in the back of my mind, the biggest asset I could bring to the game was my proactiveness. In racing, you really, really learn how to be proactive because, you're never at home. You're never working from your home office. You're working from the road or a racetrack or somewhere where you're doing an appearance, or things happen all the time on the fly. And you have to be able to proact, not just react. And I feel like racing gave me a great skill set in that, has given me that. And that really was nice to have when I did something outside of racing.
Absolutely. What in your opinion makes a race weekend go smoothly from a PR perspective? Obviously, it's a lot of prep work, which you've already done, right? But then on the actual race weekend itself, there's obviously there's a tight schedule, and you're kind of wrangling cats half the day, making sure drivers are where they need to be. But what is it? What's a smooth weekend versus a not so smooth weekend?
Okay, so write this down, gals, because this is super important. I was really lucky to be there were a lot of really good PR gals when I came on the scene, like Susan Bradshaw at Marlboro, Team Penske, and Lisa Boggs, and Kathy Lauterbach, who's still at Ray Hall and Linda Rosenberg, Genoa. And I watched them and I tried to learn from them. And probably the best thing I ever learned was media windows. So when you're a PR rep for a race team, you're in charge of the driver's schedule. And you have to work closely with your crew chief, because maybe they have driver change practice planned, and your engineers because they have debriefs. And then you have your sponsorship person because they have suite visits that need to happen. And then you've done all this work to pitch this media, and you need to protect your relationship with the media and have them on time because they have other interviews. So it's this kind of wrangling of how do you make all this happen? And so it's all boils down to organization. Anytime I go into a race weekend not totally prepared, it's a rough weekend. So I've really learned my lesson. You've got to build your schedule ahead of time, and for your drivers, build media windows. And so in those media windows, look at the schedule. I never bug a driver. I try to never bug a driver 45 minutes before or after a session. And that's where I develop a relationship with an engineer and a crew chief. We kind of set that in the beginning of the season because they need them for debriefs or prep. But you have a media window. And so all the things that come at you on a race weekend that you didn't have scheduled, you have this little media window where you can stick things in, and you tell your driver ahead of time, hey, look, this is what we know we have, but we also have this little window for all the extra stuff. And it makes a weekend go so much smoother. It took me a while to learn it, but it's they're a big deal.
A lifesaver. What happens if you have a driver that doesn't want it? I mean, in your career, you don't have to name any names, but have you had some difficult drivers because some drivers are a dream and some drivers are a nightmare? And can you talk about let's be clear, like a dream, we know what that's like. Tell us about the nightmares.
I mean, I definitely
how does that manifest and what do you do about it?
Yeah. So that's another thing that's gotten easier with age. Because you will have drivers that don't want to do any media. They don't want to do any appearances. They always run late. I'm coming. But, there might be 100 fans waiting for them at one appearance and they're waiting, right? So you look bad when you're late, and it's hard. And as the PR person, you have to make it happen, and you have to make them do it. I think the best piece of advice I could give for that is you have to develop trust. And it's that you scratch my back, I scratch yours. So my goal every race weekend is to try to help make my drivers as successful as possible, their weekend as successful as possible and as easy as possible. So there's lots of times that I go get them their food, or there's lots of times that I'll run and pick their wife up, or there's lots of times that I'll do things that really not necessarily are my job, but it's above and beyond because I know that I need them to. Plus, you want to help people, but there's things that I can do to make their weekend easier. Then it's going to make my weekend easier too. So preparation, organization, and develop relationships. And when you have a driver that just absolutely doesn't want to go, sometimes you have to say, look, this is your job. These people are counting on you. You're not only making yourself look bad, but you're making our partners look bad. You're making me look bad. You're making our team owner look bad. And then generally, they get the job done.
I think too, at this point,
it can be hard, especially on a bad day.
Exactly.
Really
and that's one thing too. I think it's that same thing, like where you, if you have a driver that's normally great, but you know that they're having a bad weekend, and then you create that safe space for them to get a little bit of breathing room around them, they appreciate that, because sometimes people are just having a bad day, and we get that. But so those moments when you can kind of come through for them and kind of give them a little bit of time out time, they appreciate that, right? But there's some, as we know, that their personalities are such that they're always that way, and that's tough. But I mean, maybe in this day and age, those princesses are fewer and farther between, because
I think they are.
Yeah, because I think the reality is, everything is so hyper competitive, and I don't mean just on the track. It's like the sponsor dollars are so hyper competitive, and the reality is there's a lot of people breathing down your, nipping at your heels to replace you. So you want to keep your job as long as you can, and talent is great, but there's a lot of talented drivers out there, right? So maybe if you have a reputation for being terrible, I mean, listen, there's still some terrible drivers that are still getting drives, but I think there's less of them than there used to be.
I agree.
Maybe? Yeah.
I agree. And the ones that are
Because they can also
difficult,
get found out, like because there's like social media, maybe that also, if somebody's a terrible, like they're not going to get, yeah, nobody's going to be covering for them because they're exposed almost.
yeah, that is true. It's not as easy to be like that. And there's a lot of unemployed drivers that are good and want their job. But I do think that the drivers that are, I don't know if difficult is the fair word, but the ones that maybe are a little lazier on the commercial side of things.
And that's true too. Like a lot of it's just like more lazy than actually being
lazy.
actively
Yeah.
hostile.
Yeah.
It's more that they're just lazy.
Because once they get there, they love their fans and they love doing it. It's just right. They also really love engineering and making their car faster. But
Sure.
but it is one of those things that if you're prepared ahead of time and they know what's coming up on their schedule, it's a little bit harder for them to try to get out. So just be organized.
Yeah, it's not like you're springing it on them.
Yeah.
So we had a few questions ahead of time from Alyssa H, and one of them was anything that you can look back in your professional career that you would have done differently, like now with hindsight, that might be good advice, cautionary tale.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I've been really lucky. Differently.
I mean, you make your own luck too, because you're always, like you say, being a hard worker, like even though teams end for no reason of your own, there's a reason why you're still in.
I've been really lucky. I haven't had that many very challenging stories. I don't want to sound egotistical, but I don't think I would have changed many things. I think I've had a lot of
That's a fair answer.
really, really great experiences. It's not always easy and it's tiring. The days you have long days and you got to manage a lot of personalities. And so sometimes it's easy to get a little bit worn down, but I feel like I've been really lucky.
That's a fair answer. Absolutely. Because I mean, and also because we all have challenges, but if they're out of your control, you just, it's life. Life is about how you handle those things, right? It's not about what happens. It's
not what happens to you. It's how you handle it.
Exactly. Okay. So here's another really great question. Let's say you were hiring a new PR person for your team, like you're going to hire a junior PR person. What key qualities and experiences would you look for in a potential candidate? So let's say you're doing the hiring. Let's say somebody doesn't have experience per se yet. So this was going to be their entry level job. What are the key characteristics or qualities and maybe some experiences that you would look for?
The number one thing I would look for probably is personality and confidence, because you have to do uncomfortable things. I mean, I cold call to pitch stories. I sometimes have to tell drivers they have to do something that they don't want to do. I sometimes have to tell somebody we don't have your tickets, or so I think someone that is has done their homework in the sport and is confident enough to be able to just get out there and you need to be bubbly. I think you need to be bubbly. And I would look at somebody that sees the value of fans. To me, fans are the most important part of the weekend. And like I said, it's easy to get in your own little world in the paddock, but you need to go into every event looking at how you're going to make new race fans and how you're going to make new fans for your brand, how you're going to get someone to believe in Hyundai or your drivers, or this is so cool because of this. So I think the number one thing I would look at is somebody that is ambitious and friendly. And then number two, I believe in writing.
Yeah.
We do a lot of writing, a lot of press releases. And that's one of the things with social media that maybe there's not as much of a focus,
right.
But maybe it is. I might not be being fair to that, but I think writing is really important. So
they're just no matter what, it's just a shorter thing. So you're just putting together, you're still being creative and it's a different kind of creativity, but there's still a good amount of writing that goes on in
there's
PR.
A good amount of writing.
Those things you can work on that muscle and get that muscle to be stronger the more you do it.
And when you feel confident in your writing and your knowledge, it's a lot easier to develop relationships with the media, because that can be intimidating because some of them know the sport better than anyone, or they're historians on it. And you want to be knowledgeable. You want to be confident when you're developing these relationships so that you could call them and pitch a story. So
One thing that you said, which I think is really important for everyone to realize about this job and what's so critical is when you're saying the personality and okay, so the confidence and granted, when you're an entry level, it's easy to say, oh, be confident. And you might question like, well, that's just part of, it's not a job for the introvert. A PR person has to be a little bit more outgoing. But that's the exact kind of crux of this is if you're cold calling those radio stations, TV stations, or
Oh, I can't hear you. Ah,
Oh, we've lost Beth's
oh, you're
audio.
back, Beth.
hello, am I
Yeah,
back?
there you are. There you are.
Okay, the last thing I heard you
Yeah.
say is when you're cold calling radio station.
When you're cold calling radio stations or TV stations, et cetera, or working with the sponsors and their PR people because they have their, PR needs for the weekend too, you're often you're representing your team and you're the first introduction that some of these entities have with the race team. So that idea of being outgoing, good energy, and all of those things, like that's what you have to, again, you
Welcoming.
work at that. Yeah, and I mean, you're literally there, almost like the handshake, somebody's first handshake, an introduction to certainly the team, possibly racing. And so that idea, I think what you say about the personality being, which will come through in an interview when you're looking to hire somebody, because let's be honest, the rest of the stuff of getting to know who the people are that you learn, right? You learn who the key players are once you're on the job, and you can get better at writing press releases the more you do it. But you're right. I think the personality that it takes is probably, the thing that you'll see instantly when you start to meet some candidates, and ideally, that's really going to carry you pretty far.
I think so. And knowledge builds confidence. So all the knowledge you can gain while you're in school or while you're preparing yourself for your career will give you a lot more confidence when you start.
Right, you have that foundation, so you feel like like if you're going to go interview with Hyundai, know who their competitors are. Understand the structure of the IMSA series and the pilot, the pilot cup and what a pilot challenge, and who the other teams are, who the other racing drivers, all of that.
Exactly.
And again, you're constantly learning, so you're going to learn more and more about that. So great question from the audience. So Marie says, I've been a little disturbed by the women drivers who are allowing themselves to be objectified for non-racing things in the interest of getting likes on social media. Mm-hmm. Do you approach PR and branding for a woman driver any differently than you would for a man? And this is you're a great person to ask because you do have, over the years, you've represented many, but I know that even within the team you're with, you have a woman driver in Taylor Hadler, but that's a good example. But how would you approach it, or do you approach it differently?
So I do. So I don't believe in that. I think that racing, it's, maybe it has traditionally been a men's sport, but I think that you get your job by working hard and you keep your job by working hard. And I'm not a fan of objectifying yourself. I think that your results speak for themselves. And I think that your career will go a lot further representing yourself and your sponsors with class.
Yes.
Than by pushing sexuality.
I agree. I agree. And it's funny because you tend to find, for what it's worth, like we can look at, think of some of the top women drivers now as some women that are getting podiums and working towards championships. If you notice they're not also, the drivers that you see in putting those sort of social posts are not necessarily high on the timing sheets. And those are, what is it, like negatively correlated. So I think that's, that's the case. And just put the effort into honing your driving skills.
Yeah. So the best drivers I've worked with are the ones that are there first thing in the morning. They're working hard. They're going through data. They're on the phone with their engineer all the time leading up to a weekend. They're training all the time. They are putting a lot of work into their job. And unless you have so much natural talent that you're fast regardless, no matter what, which pretty much nobody is, they have to work.
Nobody is.
You don't have time for a lot of the nonsense. It's okay. Like I'm starting to see more women's brands come in, and like what Catherine did makeup, I thought that was really cool. And she handled that beautifully. Was out of Indy this year, I think, right? She was
Yeah,
represented by a
and
makeup company.
Yeah.
Never seen a makeup company in motorsports before, but she handled it really well.
yeah,
She's a class act.
yeah, like the pictures aren't crazy or anything. Exactly. And it's wait, I was just going to say something that you said that about about the talent, about just having a natural talent. I remember reading a thing years ago that Jimmy Johnson said, and he said, when he was starting up, and you may know, many people may know, he started racing motorcycles as a kid, like kid and teenager, and even motorcycles, and then switching to cars. He made the comment that he's like, I didn't have the most natural talent. He's like, I worked the hardest. And I love that somebody like that would say that out loud, because I think a lot of people kind of give themselves a pass. Like, well, if I only had Jimmy Johnson's talent. It's like, Jimmy Johnson doesn't have Jimmy Johnson's talent. Like, he built that talent. And that's the, early mornings, late nights. And in fairness,
and he's still one of the hardest working drivers out there.
Correct.
We were fortunate to run him on a sports car team that I was with. He was already like a 6-time champion at that point. And my husband engineered him on that team. And he worked as hard as any driver we've seen.
Yep.
And he's at the racetrack running in the morning, and he's training all the time, and he works very hard on the commercial side. That's why he's as successful as he is.
I mean, if you look at like the fact that he even went to INDYCAR, like he didn't need to do any of that. That's just like that. I want to test myself. I want to see what I can do. And then, yeah, absolutely. But I think that, and the reality is, although we're talking about drivers, the reality is you can apply that to any role on the team or any career. Like, the hard work and the stuff that people don't see is the stuff that kind of, it's the early mornings and the late nights that make you successful. But I think it's important to, we've been talking about this whole idea of women in the social media that, and because obviously a lot of young drivers reach out to us and, want to kind of get their break. And we've talked about this in a broader sense of, what do we say to them? Because we also don't want, listen, I've talked to young drivers whose parents are also kind of fine with them doing the bikini shoots. And we talk about that, like, well, I guess we can't stop everybody can do whatever they want. God bless, for sure. But the idea is, well, at least we want to show them that there are other ways to do it. And then they don't think that that's the only way that you're going to get sponsors or the only way that you're going to get a job.
Yeah. I mean, there's responsible ways to do things, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. Don't do it.
Yeah. And and we all know it. There was a point there where there would be, sort of people that were a bit predatory about it. Like, oh, we'll do a whole photo shoot and the unfortunate thing too is it's kind of like everything in social media, like everything's kind of part of your permanent record. And so you can't undo it either. So, when you have an opportunity to talk to a young driver, if they have the self-awareness to ask the question, because I think we haven't really talked about it a lot among women. I mean, it's an interesting topic.
It is. It is.
So,
and it makes me a little nervous.
I know.
So Beth, there is one question I might have gotten circulated in the chat box, and maybe you guys touched on this or not, but Alicia B did ask, how do you think from your experience those separate roles can help each other, especially on a smaller team where roles are crossed a lot?
Oh, so like marketing.
Like for a little team where you kind of have either wear the separate hats or you each have the individual hats.
Well, so they help each other a lot. So for example, when I'm at the track, I'll do things from, plan a sponsor dinner to host a tour for Michelin. You jump in and help each other any way you can. I think I was explaining the differences just because, in case anybody was curious exactly what PR does or what marketing does, or who's the one that does the sales part. Generally, that's a marketing person, but you work together closely and help each other all the time.
And one question that we have too is, what would you say is your career highlight?
Oh man. So I've gotten to do some really cool things in the last 5 years with Hyundai. I've gotten to work with Annie Leibovitz twice.
That's awesome.
She's a world famous photographer.
And what was the context of that? Like, obviously it was a photo shoot.
So it's for a campaign for Hyundai. It's called the Journeys campaign. That was pretty amazing. I've I've had a lot of amazing experiences. I've been really lucky. I have to say this last experience was with Robbie Wickens, watching him transition, coming back to racing in a wheelchair and transition to being a paralyzed athlete has been really fascinating and rewarding. I didn't know him when he was injured or when he,
Right.
at that time. I watched his recovery along with everybody else and thought, wow, what a amazing person. And getting to where I was there the day of his first test when he drove a car for the first time with his hands, and it was like there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
Right.
But
Where
it's
was
been
that?
that
Where
was
did you
in
go to?
Ohio in 2021. But it's been a really great privilege to work with him in this as he's transitioned and now as a paralyzed champion.
Right.
He works so hard and it is, I know it's harder for him now. I mean, it's not normal, right? Like it's not normal to have to figure out, how you're going to get over the pit wall, where you're going to go to the bathroom, how are you going to get your food, your
Right.
wheelchair, where are you going to park in a grass at a racetrack in a wheelchair.
Right. Right.
So that's been, plus all the driving challenges. Now he accelerates, shifts, brakes with his hands.
Right. Yeah.
On a racetrack that's 4 miles long with lots of topography with 53 other cars and you're racing. And guess what?
Right.
His hands are shot and blistered. He still has to use them to get himself around after the race and the rest of the day and every day. So working with him and watching him win this championship has been a highlight for sure. But I've been lucky to have a lot of really cool experiences.
That's amazing. Sally's asking a question about sponsorship. Saying that as a young woman driver coming up, do you think she should focus more on companies that target female athletes in particular, or just companies interested in racing? I've always struggled with finding sponsorship, so if you have any advice, it would help greatly.
So I would look at companies, that you have a connection with in some way, whether it's a company from your hometown, a company that your family's involved with. I would first always look at companies where you might have a contact. And then I would look at what makes you unique. You're unique because you're a female driver, but you have to do more than that. What is it that you're doing to set yourself aside? You can't just, the female driver is an amazing story. There's a lot of them now, and there's champions. We've got a 2-time champion on our team. You've got to set yourself aside. There's a gal that's driving Hyundais now. Her name's Sally McNulty, and she uses social media to do, she makes videos of herself working on the car. So she'll make a video changing a turbo, or she'll make a video, doing an oil change, or like really getting into the nuts and bolts of a car. And she has like 500,000 followers, and Hyundai loves her and the fans love her because she's relatable, because she's doing things that lots of people have to do or they hire people to do. Yeah. But she's also a race car driver. So I would say make yourself a little bit unique in a different way. And that's with your social too. Don't just do the same social everybody's doing, because it's the same as everybody's doing. Try to find a way to be unique.
Can I do a shout out to Sally real quick?
Yeah.
This weekend, the Williams Formula One team had a standalone sim program, and I reached out to Sally, and in 15 minutes she was there with lots of photo ops. So make yourself accessible all the time.
Yeah, true. Be available.
Be in unique situations and make yourself accessible. Sally, thank you for being there, because they had some great photos, and we'll be using those on social media as well.
I think the other thing to always remember is, you always hear the phrase like, oh, it's all who you know, and that can sound like discouraging, like, oh, those people, who do I know? The reality is, more people than you think you do, in the sense that if you're a driver and you're looking to advance your career, make sure that everybody in your sphere knows that you're a driver. So when you're at the dentist, just pat and be, sort of be outgoing and chat. You never know that, your dentist, who you might have been going to for the past 5 years and you have a rapport with, maybe their next door neighbor is the, chief marketing officer of whatever, right? And so it's one of those things that you kind of have to like talk about what you do often, and you'll be surprised. I mean, how many times do we get on an airplane and we put the headset on? Like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm not saying that you want to be that nagging person that's chatting to everybody, but you just want to be kind of more open to conversations maybe than you have in the past. If that's, okay.
I agree. Open-minded.
Where you
Yeah.
start just kind of striking up conversations with people, because you never know. It's not necessarily who they are, but who they may know. And I have had a lot of, opportunities come to my race team just by doing that.
Yep. And then also be able to show them why it's worthwhile to support your effort or your race team, not just, because they get to follow you, but because show them how they can use it for their clients or how they can use it for their brand. At track activation, you'll hardly ever come across a guest at a track that isn't blown away by their experience.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, as long as you're not coming off like, hey, just please give me money so I can keep doing what I like to do.
Yes.
You cannot. This is a business, and there was an inflection point when tobacco money left, and it really changed the business. And
Really
that's
did.
the era that we're in. We're in our no tobacco era.
Yeah.
So
Still.
that is it. We are at 8:00. So thank you guys so much. Katie, that was really a fantastic conversation.
Thanks. And I just want to say to all the gals out there, don't give up. And when you're at a racetrack, go introduce yourself. Like, it'll open people's eyes when you get uncomfortable and go ask someone a question, or, meet as many people as you can. And I just got a LinkedIn from somebody. I'd love to be LinkedIn contacts with you. Feel